Hello, everyone, and welcome to another VSM Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Krakowski, joined this week by Goran Vazovic.
How's it going, Daniel? How's it going, everybody?
Good. Well. And today we have an extra special guest. We have John Fridlington, who is the CEO, master genius behind SPAR, which is the St. Paul Area Association of Realtors. If you've ever worked with me, pretty much if you've ever worked with a realtor in the Twin Cities in the metro area, you have interacted with the technology that they maintain, create through the North Star MLS, as well as they're a group that's advocating for realtors, but also at the same time really advocating for the consumers at the end of the day. So, John, real pleasure. Thank you for making the time and coming and visiting with us.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you very much.
So we were talking a little bit offline before we turned the mics on when you got here about, very topical. We're looking at, I believe, tomorrow, but if not sometime this week, there's a new tax bill that's being put forward, and a lot of it has to do with affecting how real estate owners, what type of deductions are available to them. And you are very knowledgeable on the subject. Of course, been in the industry for a long time, been all over the country working in the industry. I think you said California, Boston, Orlando, and now the Twin Cities. You are an attorney, so you can give legal advice. You're one of the few.
In California.
In California, true. And, just a wealth of information, knowledge, which we'd expect nothing less from the people who put together all of the data that we use so regularly. So what is kind of what is your thought, and what is the association doing about this tax law that's being put forward?
Well, SPAR is an integral part, the St. Paul Area Association is an integral part of the National Association and the Minnesota Association. So we are like three levels of a pyramid. Mm-hmm. And the National Association handles federal regulatory and legislative issues. So they have taken the lead on this tax bill as it's made its way through Congress. To be objective about it, the National Association of Realtors has had grave concerns about the legislation as it's morphed through various iterations. They have been very concerned about maintaining a meaningful mortgage interest deduction to have favorable tax status for residential transactions, to make buying a home as opposed to renting a favorable financial decision for people to make. They also, on the commercial side, have fought very hard to maintain the 1031 like-kind exchange rules that currently exist in the Internal Revenue Code. So those have been the two principal residential commercial issues. It looks as if the final bill is pretty set in its form, so I think when it's voted on tomorrow or later this week, as you say, we'll be ready to get all the information out to our Realtor members, the 7,200 Realtor members who belong to SPAR, and through the state to all of the members in the state of Minnesota.
That's fantastic, because I think that's going to be a big shock for a lot of people. One of the items that we were speaking about earlier is something that we as realtors love to share. It's one of the few pieces of information that we're maybe qualified to do as it affects taxes. But it's the fact that if you're occupying a property for 2 of the last 5 years, you are excluded from the capital gains taxes on it, up to $250,000 for an individual, and then $500 for a married couple.
Yes.
And I know that initially was in play as well, and that was on the table. But yes, my understanding from speaking with you is that's off the table now?
Correct. There was a proposal to change what you just explained, 2 out of the last 5 years in your principal residence. That will be maintained, which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then going into the interest deduction, that's another huge component. And is that more designed to be targeted towards residential owner occupants, or are they looking more for investors?
Well, first of all, there was a proposal to do away with the mortgage interest deduction for second homes, which are a very large part of the market here in Minnesota and also in Wisconsin, in our neighboring state. So fortunately, they did not do away with mortgage interest deduction for second homes. So that stays in.
Great.
However, the current cap for existing mortgages is you can deduct the interest on a mortgage up to $1 million. There was a proposal to reduce that from the House to $500,000. The compromise that the Congress came up with is a limit of $750,000.
Okay.
The important detail there is that the current existing mortgages are not impacted by this change.
Oh.
So if you have a mortgage up to $1 million now, you can still deduct the interest on that amount if it's an existing mortgage. The rule of $750,000 as the cap applies only to new mortgages.
Right, so you can be grandfathered in, which
Yes,
is nice.
yes.
And that's for primary residences?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. But secondary also, as
Right.
long as you don't go above the cap, which in the future is going to be $750,000.
Right, and it's top of my mind right now because I met with my accountant about this very thing this morning,
Yeah.
and he was alluding to, and maybe throwing this out of left field for you, but if this real estate is owned in a corporation and used exclusively for a business purpose, that there may be some exemption on the table. Have you heard anything like that, or?
There's been some discussion about that, but I've heard disagreement about.
Okay.
Essentially, as we were discussing previously, whether if you prepay some of the items for 2018 in 2017 before the new law goes into effect, can you sort of advance pay those and still deduct? That's a question I'd do a lot of research into before I relied on someone's advice on that.
Yes, definitely something we need to look into more.
You mentioned that we're supposed to get the answer tomorrow, or whether or not, but it's not pertaining to whether it be an individual or on a corporate level deduction for tomorrow's vote, or whether or not the bill is going to pass.
Well, I guess the point, if I understand the question, was that if you've got a mortgage that is between $750,000 and $1 million currently, it's in place today, you still have the cap of $1 million. It's only for new mortgages that you get after the law becomes effective that the cap goes down to $750,000.
Got it.
So what that does, unfortunately, when you look at the implications, that gives people who are looking at high market value homes an incentive to stay in their home,
right,
if they want the higher limit on their deductibility.
Right. Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not assumable like some of those great interest rate loans are in the past.
And then the other thing, if I may, that people need to be aware of is that the bill does place a cap of $10,000 annually on your ability to deduct income tax, state income tax, as we have here in Minnesota, and most states do, as well as the property taxes that you pay, state and local. And in states like Florida, as you may know, they don't have an income tax, but they have a very high state sales tax. And so in Florida, and states like Florida, Washington states and other, you can deduct a certain amount of sales tax.
Okay. Interesting. So you come now, into your story maybe a little bit here. So you become an attorney. You get your license, and you're over in California, and you kind of go on a world tour then of managing these association of realtors. What did you learn from moving around to all of these different markets? And my kind of assumption of going California, Boston, Orlando is these are pretty major markets. I know what the real estate market in Boston is like a little bit. I have a client out there. California, I think everybody knows a little bit. What kind of changes did you see in those places when you were working out there, and how does our market kind of compare?
The California market was the first one that I really became enmeshed in and was very active in. When I worked for the California Association, first as an attorney and then in other roles, I was actually there for 22 years. So that's kind of my baseline that I measure other real estate markets against.
Yeah.
And the California real estate market is, in terms of process, it's very consumer friendly, it's very easy, it's very straightforward, very, very modern. Of course, the prices are incredible. In the city of Palo Alto, where Stanford University is, for example, the median sales price is $2.5 million.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that's by quantity of transactions, it's a whole different world than, say, here in Minnesota, where statewide our median sales price as of November this year was about $225,000. In the metro in November it was about $255,000 median price.
Yeah.
So 10% of what the median price is in Palo Alto.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. I will say, since you're asking about other jurisdictions, when I went from very modern, consumer-friendly California to Massachusetts, they still use pen and quill, I think, there. It's just like...
Barristers in there.
Oh, yeah, it's an attorney closing state. And many of the attorneys, that's all they do is closings, and it's just a shell game. Frankly, it's a cottage industry to keep those attorneys in business.
Wow.
Huh.
And it's very expensive.
Yeah. No, I've heard that about Boston as well.
Yeah.
So, going from... So were you out of Palo Alto then? Is that why you referenced that, or you just?
No, I'm familiar with it, but I lived in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great. So then you move over to cold, snowy at times Boston. Because my understanding is that Boston has been seeing some pretty substantial growth over the last decade, 2 decades, whatever the case may be. Is there anything specifically that you attribute it to? And I'll quickly go. The reason I'm asking is I know you work with a lot of the municipal governments here, and advocate for us and the consumer, and building up market growth within the city itself. A lot of times takes some planning, working with these municipal governments. Was there a lot of cooperation, you think, that made that happen, that boom out in Boston, or
I'm sorry, didn't
no,
interrupt.
Please, go ahead.
Boston is a tech hub, and Boston is a very young city. It's a very progressive city. Within the metro area of Boston, there are 42 colleges and universities. So, education and technology are the 2 big industries there, and those are both booming.
Right.
Boston is one of those cities, somewhat like San Francisco, that there really are no ungentrified areas in the city. The whole city has what used to be considered rather underserved neighborhoods. Those are they don't exist anymore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is very speculative at this point, but if you had to look at it as a whole of the population of the city, is that generally viewed as a good thing or a bad thing from their perspective?
Well, it depends on which side of it you're looking.
That's a good point.
I mean, if you've been, say, an immigrant who has a low-paying service job and have had a rent-controlled apartment for, say, 10 years, and all of a sudden the landlord kicks you out and goes to luxury upgrades in the apartment and triples the rent, so folks from the tech industry who are making in the 6 figures can live in your former apartment. That's a tough one.
Right. And I asked specifically because I know St. Paul, we just had this mayoral election, and a lot of it, the word gentrification came up a lot.
Yes.
Where I think 2 of the candidates at least were campaigning actively against gentrification, which, to us as an investment real estate firm is always a little bit dicey, because we of course understand that there's a lot of people who need affordable housing, but at the same time, if you're looking at a continuum of progress for a city, you could also potentially make the argument that Boston is doing perhaps better financially as a municipality than a Detroit, for example, where the gentrification level is very, very low.
Yeah, I was in San Francisco to that point a few months ago, and San Francisco is a city in which there are very clear signs of wanting to be a little flashy about your money. And so the best restaurants in the city, considered by the critics to be the best, in most cases you have to have at least a 6-month reservation to get into some of these restaurants because there's so much money floating around and people are spending it.
Yeah, there have been numerous documentaries made in just San Francisco, pretty much what you were talking about in Boston, where the rent control or subsidy housing and any low income is pretty much vanished from the city to make way for people who can afford bigger and better. And there's a huge debate. Both sides have good points, and I didn't realize that Boston was in the same situation. Has it gone through the same transformation in San Francisco before or after or during?
Kind of concurrently with San Francisco. Boston...
I feel like all I'm hearing about is San Francisco, though. 'Cause Boston is like,
Boston is... it doesn't look as flashy as San Francisco with all the new construction that San Francisco has because they have very strict historic preservation regulations in Boston. So you have to keep the facade. If you want to
kind of like St. Paul.
Yeah. You have to, exactly. It's very much like St. Paul. You have to keep the historic facade even if you put in a new building.
Yep. No,
which is a good thing, I think.
We have we own a building right across the street, and it's on the list of historic buildings. So I know when we had to just fix brick, it was a big deal.
Yes.
The brick color, the mortar color, how it's mixed, what ingredients are used. So it's a big deal, and it could add to your cost. So.
Yeah, and that could also be part of the reason why the pricing's a little higher out there too, because replacement cost is so high and maintenance costs are so high.
Actually, the median rents in Boston are higher than New York City.
Really?
Yeah.
No way. I didn't. Well, I mean, you got MIT. You have other stuff.
You got lots of things.
You said 42?
42 colleges and universities.
Can you name them all, Daniel?
I can name at least 2 of them. BU, BC, Harvard. Yeah.
Well, the saying is that Harvard owns Boston and BC runs it.
I like that.
So, are you done with the Boston story? I didn't want to jump the gun.
Well, no. So I'm curious then how, when you look at these cities, and I don't know if you were necessarily there during these great growth periods, because I don't have the exact timeline that you were in each of them, but is it fair to say that you were there during some of these growth times?
Yes. The area of Boston that is called the South Boston area.
Dorchester?
Well, near Dorchester.
Okay,
yeah, but right on the water. It's across a small inlet of water from downtown Boston.
Okay.
That used to be all parking lots and kinds of car shops, that sort of thing. It was kind of like University Avenue would be here in St. Paul.
Okay.
And parts of it. And that's all high-rise, brand-new buildings now. It's just totally, everything is brand-new high-rise.
Yeah. Wow. So it would seem then that more so than any specific municipal programs, anything put in place, it had more to do with just the existing infrastructure that was there because it could support the growth.
Yes.
When you're looking at the Twin Cities, are there any similarities that you can pick out between the two? And I mean, where do you think we're headed as a metro area?
Well, I think St. Paul and Minneapolis, the metro, have a great base of Fortune 500 headquartered companies here. Unfortunately, it seems every year a couple of them are sold off or merge or otherwise going out of existence. So that's a good base. I think that the fact that the state of Minnesota was just this last week named as the best run state in the country is a good credit to this area. That's phenomenal. Utah's number 2. I think
what publication? I didn't.
Wall Street Journal, I think.
Okay, I wasn't aware, but
They do this survey. It was within the last week. They do this survey every year and rank the best managed cities in the country. So that was a plus. Having all the educational institutions here are great. I was sorry to hear about McNally Smith closing. I hope maybe something takes the place of that here in St. Paul.
Yeah.
I think that the education level of the citizenry and the relatively high wages are all positives for the residents of the Twin Cities and make this a desirable place to live. And I think the arts culture scene here is very vibrant, as well as the music scene. So those are all pluses.
Great. All right. So there it is. We're still investing in the right area, at least, Goran.
No, we came here 7.5, 8 years ago, before this area in Lower Town
for the Saint Stadium.
Right. I mean, before all of that, and this city has a lot room to grow, which is what attracts me to it and makes me want to keep investing here versus some other like Boston, Chicago, or other top tier cities where it's just like wall to wall, everything's already built out. Here at least you have projects going on, opportunities. I know there was that huge project that just now I think it's hit a snag down by the river. Have you heard of it?
Where the Westlaw building, where an old jail, and
So that was kind of in the middle of being a $250 million project, which would have been, huge, probably the biggest investment I think the city has ever seen. But I think that's on hold right now because they're still negotiating something. But think of that opportunity. Where else, in what other, major city can you have that big of a opportunity,
I think that's true. I think that's one of the reasons why the Twin Cities has a very robust restaurant scene and is known for the culinary skill that comes here, because a lot of the chefs worked on either coast and couldn't afford to buy a space for their own restaurant, but they can afford to buy a space here and do their thing, which is what most chefs want to do eventually.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you earlier. I thought you had a question you wanted to get to.
Oh, no. I was just going to get to, we're all obviously going to get to as far as the story, how you became to be, the CEO of SPAR and what brought you into St. Paul and
if
Minnesota.
you wouldn't mind, we love stories.
Okay,
the audience loves
sure.
stories. How did you get in cold, snowy Minnesota?
Well, the short answer is I had lived in Orlando for 10 years. So I was from Iowa, Los Angeles, Boston, Orlando, St. Paul. So I haven't gone to Seattle to live yet. That's my one remaining part of the country I haven't gotten to, and that's on the to-do list. But so I was ready for a change. My family, my parents were getting older, and I decided that I wanted to be closer to them, relatives who lived in Iowa. And some of my college and law school friends wanted to be closer, so it was just time to make a change.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, we're happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't know, and this is more, I guess, towards the average consumer, how much interaction and what the association does to ensure that there's a lot of consumer protection out there. So realtor, real estate agent tend to be used pretty interchangeably, but they are quite different things. Realtor is like real estate agent with some extra responsibilities, duties, and obligations.
Right.
And I think, for us as agents, there's some pros and cons. There's some times where you are late on something and you get an email and you panic, have to go change something on the MLS to make sure that it works. But what do you feel that the association really does to protect the consumer? Because I see it all the time, but I guess I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, SPAR has a very direct, very rememberable, if that's a word, very easy to remember slogan and mission statement, and that is better agents, better communities. And that sums up what we do. We work with agents to provide professionalism classes, to provide continuing education opportunities, to advocate on their behalf at the local level and at the state level and through the National Association at the national level. We have a communication communications focus, both internal to keep agents aware of things like the new tax law changes, case in point, like the impacts of net neutrality and the FCC's decision recently to remove those consumer protections. Realtors fought that very hard, and I don't think that's a dead issue. I think personally, and the Realtor organization officially feels that this removal of net neutrality is anti-consumer, and we've called it out, that it's just a power grab and a money grab by a few large corporations, and it's going to hurt small brokerages, it's going to hurt MLSs, it's going to hurt consumers. So we are active on issues like that. I think we're generally, if you look at it, we're on the consumer side of most issues. If you stop and think about it, there is no other organization or association in the United States that fights for private property rights other than the Realtors. There is no Homeowners of America Association. There are 1.3 million Realtors in this country who do every day work toward successfully achieving the American dream for consumers, as well as protecting the rights that people have once they are owners of property. That's really important.
That's great. Yeah, there's not another organization.
No, there isn't. No. So Realtors are, they are pro-consumer, just start to finish is my view. I think that Realtors on the community half, Better Communities half, are they're not leasing or selling or appraising or arranging financing on or doing investments in a vacuum. You have to have a viable community that is desirable with good schools, good crime statistics, good infrastructure generally, fair taxes, jobs, et cetera. And so Realtors, for example, in this area are very active on two major projects in the area, the Rice Creek Commons project in the North Metro, which is going to be a huge master planned development, as well as the Ford plant in the area where I live in Highland Park. And
how do you feel about that Ford plant? I'm just curious.
I think it's great.
Okay. No, I just want to get, I already saw some signs. I read about it and I saw a couple of renderings, videos. I'm like, wow, that looks really good.
Yeah.
Great use of space. And I felt like it would appease everybody.
Yeah.
But then I'm seeing signs, up the road, stop the Ford plant. I'm like, it's no matter, you can't. There's always somebody that's going to be against it. But I'm trying to see what somebody that's against it, what their rationale is.
Well, their stated things that I've heard are it will result in traffic congestion, and that the community doesn't have the infrastructure to support that amount of development. Those are two of the arguments that I've heard. I think that those are somewhat specious.
The entire development has so many uses, multi-uses, residential, business,
right?
Everything.
And it's going to be connected to transit, and so the A line goes right by there already.
Right. That's why I was like, oh, it should be pretty easy, but I guess there's always going to be.
Yeah.
I'd have to imagine you have to be a pretty studied economist to have a good idea of whether or not the infrastructure can support a development like that. It's speculative.
And you probably get different opinions from different people.
Of course, yeah. Well, so you were mentioning a little bit about the protections that the association offers to the consumer, and in a way, I'm just kind of thinking about it a little bit deeper now for the first time, maybe. But I think you can perhaps, and I will make the argument that by protecting the consumer and looking out for the consumer, you're also really looking out for the agents as well. Mm-hmm. Reason being, I think that it's fair to say that there's been some reputational damage done to the realtor profession due to some of the unfortunate economic circumstances that took place in the last decade and a half. Right. Whether or not that's truly to blame on the individual realtor or the association of realtors as a whole is another story. But I think by really, requiring more from the people that are affiliated with you through the association, you're doing them a great service, because that's really what we need to gain that credibility back. Because I still feel it. Maybe 5-10% of the people that I talk to, they have an inherent distrust of any real estate agent, any realtor, based on some bad experience throughout their past, or maybe a family member. Have you seen that there's been an arc of what people think about realtors during your tenure working with them?
Well, the National Association of Realtors has had a public relations campaign with TV ads, radio ads, newspaper ads, et cetera, going on probably 15 years at this point. And through that period, I don't know that there's a direct correlation between the advertising campaign and the results, but the general opinion, as measured by polling, of the professionalism of realtors has slightly moved, not much, granted, but it has slightly moved in a positive direction. One of the initiatives, it's not where it needs to be, definitely not there. One of the initiatives that the National Association of Realtors has in 2018 is a program they call Commitment to Excellence. And as you alluded to earlier, Daniel, the Code of Ethics of Realtors does set them apart to a higher standard than the average licensee who has not chosen to become a member of the Realtor Association. So people need to keep in mind that having a license and being a realtor are not synonymous. They're two different things. But what NAR is trying to do is say the Code of Ethics is fine, but that's the equivalent of, if you will, a high school education, using that analogy. We want people to all have a bachelor's degree, meaning commit to professional conduct that is not just not in violation of the Code of Ethics, but that goes farther and is affirmatively an effort to reach that higher standard.
Right, and I think that a lot of realtors, because again, I'm sure you've interacted with people who have been frustrated with some of the policies that are put in place that govern us, because to the individual, maybe they're not the one who's creating problems. So hey, why do I have to follow this? This doesn't seem to make sense for me. But much like a parent encouraging your child to eat some vegetables, it's like, hey, it's not just necessarily about you as the individual. It's I have to think about all of these people.
Right.
And you know what? By adhering to these guidelines, we will do better as a group. And that benefits you as well.
I think that's absolutely right. It's, the old adage, which sometimes is apt, sometimes not, is the rising tide lifts all boats. And I think if the professionalism and the level of ethics are higher, then everybody wins on that, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure you've run into it a fair few times, but even still, with all the oversight and all of the regulation that we have, not necessarily from the association, but from local municipal laws, state laws, federal laws, you still see, unfortunately, bad actors out there. So I think it's great that we have a higher level to aspire to.
What's interesting, I feel like it's always any industry is going to have your bad apples and stuff like that. But I don't know, for some reason, agents, real estate agents, realtors have like I don't know, just a different rap than most people. Maybe even like attorneys or lawyers and realtor agents. Are they in the same boat? Are we in the same boat?
I think so. I think.
But it's something
lawyers are just better at everything. They're just more learning.
Something that I just learned that I didn't know is, as far as SPAR goes, that it's it protects the consumer. But then us being part of it, we adhere to those guidelines, and we also want to do what's in the best interest of the consumer. Meanwhile, consumer is questioning whether or not there's a need for a real estate agent, or if they want to use a realtor to represent them in a real estate transaction. And then you have different industries that are coming out. For example, Redfin, and other technologies that are going to come out, that blockchain. They're trying to eliminate what they call it, the middleman. I feel like the middleman has that phrase has a bad or negative connotation because of, you think you just have to pay more to a bunch of people, not realizing there's a need to have this buffer between you and somebody you don't know in this big transaction.
I think maybe one of the reasons why there is such interest in and maybe some negative feeling by consumers about realtors is we're talking about the largest single investment that most people make in their life.
Right.
And so they're going to be hypersensitive. And, and understandably,
right.
they feel they have to protect themselves and protect their resources. So I think if they're being maybe a bit hypercritical, that might kind of just go with the territory, considering the context.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, to be sure.
Right. No, and I was going to, ask you to that point as far as different technologies that are coming, the next 5-10 years from, the blockchains to where basically technology is going to eliminate a quote-unquote middleman, or websites that are like Redfin, where they're kind of just treating this more of a quick impersonal transaction.
Right.
How do you see, as far as SPAR and other organizations, working with what's to come?
Well, I think one of the things that doesn't directly involve SPAR, but is an interesting trend, is the Bitcoin craze right now.
Mm-hmm.
That Bitcoin is selling for 17 times what it did at the beginning of the year, I think. And if you read the blogs about real estate, some listing agents are now listing their properties for sale in Bitcoin.
Right.
Wow.
And, so that's a huge change.
Yeah.
Another huge change that I think is going to possibly be an industry evolution, if not revolution, is the creation of what's called Project Upstream. And Upstream, quite simply, is a broker-owned service that would, in the eyes of the largest brokerages in the country, restore their control over their listing data. And I can explain it if you'd like. But
Please. I'm actually very curious.
Well, so Edina Realty is a big proponent of this.
They are, yes.
Especially when it comes to Zillow.
Yeah, all of the biggest companies in the country, including Berkshire Hathaway.
How much
Home
of
Services.
that is, and I see it, obviously if I was a Edina Realty, I would want to, constrict the way my information is being shared. How much of that is really for the consumer of the benefit versus, hey, Zillow, we don't want you to display our content without us getting a piece, because you're getting a piece and charging back for leads, etc.
Yeah, well, the short, from the brokerage community's perspective, Goran, what you just said, the brokers would say that some of the portals are getting our listing data, which is our intellectual property.
It's the hard work because it takes time for me to
and money,
and anybody marketing, construct, and all of a sudden somebody else has that data in 3 seconds, and then they can profit out of it.
Yeah, and the way they profit is they sell back the leads on your listing. So that's the argument I think most brokerage companies make.
That's my argument too. As well. So
what Project Upstream would do is instead of putting your listing, as is currently the case as a listing broker or agent, into the multiple listing service, in our case North Star MLS, you would enter the data into Project Upstream, which would be a data, basically a big aggregation of national data. And then you would have total control over where your listing went. Sometimes the gripe has been from brokers that when they put the listing into the MLS, they've lost control of it and they don't know where it's going.
Which is true.
Yeah. And so Upstream would do away with that because you have total control and you know your listing's only going to go where you use the dashboard to send it.
Have they had discussions or talks with Zillow's and Trulia's, the heavyweights in the industry, regarding how this data is distributed?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think companies like Edina you've mentioned have spoken with their policies of not having the feeds anymore. And
right, and that's kind of where the catch-22 is, where you want to protect your hard work and the fact that you've got an opportunity to earn a sale, et cetera, and then kind of trying to see, okay, well, is this in the better interest of the public, where now, John Smith has to go to 17 different websites just to get, to find what they need, or if they can just go to one site like Zillow, they'll have all that information in order to make their buying decision or selling decision much easier. But then again, it's like, okay, Zillow is a for-profit company. They're not a non-profit. It's not like a Google.
No, and I think certainly the rap against some of the portals has been that their information is wildly inaccurate and outdated, and so that disserves the consumer, because I hear from realtors every day that the buyer they're working with says, I want to see 15 Elm Street, and it costs X number of dollars, when 15 Elm Street sold a year ago, and the price that's on there is like $200,000 less than it really sold for.
Right.
And so that does a disservice to the consumers, because they have unrealistic and erroneous information.
Yeah, I think sometimes it has the right info, sometimes it doesn't have all of the updated, but they do try to update it. Obviously, they're in the business of selling info. Yeah. I think it's just a matter of it's convenient, and it's a great way for me to advertise a listing and or attract buyers. But again, at what point do you say, okay, hey, we're going to have to look at this? Because I know, you spend money on Zillow ads, for example.
Used to.
And, the value where they're essentially saying, hey, thanks for all your listings. Here are all the leads for your listings. And thanks for all that,
Yeah, right.
Thanks for the free info that we sell back to you.
There is, along this discussion, there is one other national development that I think tries to meet your point, Goran, and that is that, again, the largest brokerage firms in the country have established an LLC to create what they're calling the Broker Public Portal, BPP. That would be like a Realtor.com, like a Zillow, like a Trulia, but it would be totally owned and controlled by brokers.
Is it somewhat similar to like the shared spreadsheets and everything that's used in New York? Is that kind of the proposal, or?
I'm not familiar with the shared spreadsheets in New York. This would be very much like public facing, so it would be.
So the public can still interact.
Yeah, it would. Instead of going to Zillow.com, it would go to
BPP,
okay.
Broker Public Portal.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're actually building that out right now.
And that would be. Would that be an association based from a broker perspective?
It would be owned by the largest brokers, but they have said that they're putting up money to build it, and the Coldwell Bankers and
So how does that affect? How does that affect then the little guys like us?
Well, they have said that they will allow other brokers to have access to it. They said they're going to build it, and there will be a fee, perhaps, to have access, but that everybody can have access to it.
Interesting.
Whether you're one of the cash contributors, one of the capital contributors or not.
No, yeah.
And they probably would have to for antitrust reasons. I think they're smart. They'd have to do that.
Right. That's something to think about. Obviously, we're not affiliated with a big brokerage, but at the same time, it's kind of how's that going to affect our business and other brokers as far as our info going on, let's say, this conglomerate that's owned by Edina, CBB, et cetera. The consumer's like, hey, maybe I should just bypass this little broker, just go with the big boys for whatever reason because they have the system. And is that going to cannibalize
Well, I think there's always
business?
I think there's always, think about Neiman Marcus and Costco. There's big and there's boutique, and some people find boutique much more desirable. Some people like the lowest price. So,
right. No, I think it's what they're trying to do. I understand 100%. That's because when you list a property, just all of the data goes out there. You don't know where it's at, how the info is displayed. Zillow, we use every single day, and sort of the majority of the consumers out there. How, that whole, if Zillow truly does have something unique, and if they're the Google, and these guys are trying to be the Bing, or are they going to be, or is it, or they're going to switch positions?
Well, when you keep in mind that Realtor.com is also owned by Rupert Murdoch and is a for-profit organization. NAR just licenses the name Realtor to that company. But if you listen to their presentations, I heard a presentation by their industry relations vice president about a month ago. She says their stats show that consumers are spending up to 3 times longer on Realtor.com than they are on Zillow.
Really?
That they're much stickier.
Did they have any explanation as to why
they had all, it was a big PowerPoint presentation and this and that. Everything was bigger and better. I mean, they weren't claiming to have more hits, but they were saying that when consumers visit, they stay longer.
Okay.
So
that's kind of, it's interesting. I've used both, but I mainly use Zillow.
Yeah.
I mean, Realtor does display all of our listing information, but ultimately the consumer is going to decide what's easiest and best for them to use.
Yeah, I think if I were a betting person, I wouldn't bet against Rupert Murdoch.
I think that's a reasonable bet.
Right. Well, when it comes to technology and, who you have on your team plays a big part.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned Rupert Murdoch and then also Paul Allen, who backed Redfin.
Yep.
I've heard a lot about it 2 years ago, but now I feel like it's died down.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure as far as a stat or numbers are concerned as where that's at. I know they're in our market, but I don't know how many people are actually going and drifting to that type of a transaction.
The big buzz right now in the last couple of weeks is Compass Real Estate, and they received $450 million in venture fund capitalization.
Wow.
And the biggest in real estate history. And they're just going like gangbusters. And they're claiming that by 2020, they want to have 20% of the market in the 20 largest metro areas in the country.
I haven't even heard of, is that Compass Real Estate?
Yes.
Okay. And they're listing or a Zillow or aggregator of information?
They're a broker. They call themselves a technology company that does brokerage.
Oh.
Okay. So it's a Redfin, but they're just putting a different spin on it.
Yeah.
Where they have employees or independent contractors who are agents and represent or match them up with the leads.
Yeah, their mantra, which apparently has caught a lot of attention in the VC world, is that they are a technology company.
Do you think that Zillow may switch to that model at some point, since they have such a
the market share already?
They could just say, hey, you top guys who are advertising, you guys want to be part of our model and all the leads are free. You can pretty much make this dollar amount without having to worry about advertising.
I think sometimes people chase after market share too much. If you look at, again, referring to Rupert Murdoch, as you probably know, he sold most of Fox to Disney this last week.
A cool 54.
Yeah.
We also share the same birthday.
Ah.
There you go.
Same bank account?
No, he didn't get that memo.
But I think that was shrewd. Rupert Murdoch had built one of the biggest international multimedia companies in the world, and yet he sold most of it off. He's not being sentimental about, gee, we built this thing and it's got a great market share. He's looking at, where can I take that money and invest it and do better than I can in entertainment?
Right.
And I think that's the way real estate brokerages need to look at it, not as in terms of, can I compete and get a bigger market share than A, B, or C, but looking beyond that to what are consumers going to want 5 years from now, and what technology do I need to acquire or develop that is going to help me have the market edge.
So
That's it.
where is he investing his money now? I want to know.
I don't think he said, but I'm sure he
Elon
had
Musk?
something in mind before he sold Fox. That was not a simple decision.
Yeah, I saw him. That was like two days ago. Not all of Fox.
No, he's keeping the TV stations
Yeah.
and the sports networks and
Right.
stuff, but all the motion picture stuff and
Yeah. How big can Disney get?
huge.
Yeah.
Can't believe it.
Star
Jeez.
Wars, right?
They own pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They second biggest opening weekend in
Yep.
movie history with Star Wars. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Huh.
Yeah.
Still have to see that. So going back to Zillow and going back to the individual brokers, the Dynas. What was the website they're creating again?
Oh, in Compass? Really?
Yeah, not Compass. The one.
Oh, they're creating Project Upstream.
Okay. And that's just in development. But
It's behind development, frankly. It's when Project Upstream, which again, it's not the Realtor Association, it's a LLC that was formed by, I think, the 10 or 12 largest brokerage companies in the country. They're the ones that formed it, and they're the board of directors, and they run it. But they have contracted, these large brokers, who are all Realtors, have contracted with the National Association of Realtors technology subsidiary to build Project Upstream, the hardware and software. And there was a timeline for when it would be doing beta testing, et cetera, and they're about 15 months behind their own timeline at this point for the rollout.
Will that be integrated with North Star MLS and different listings?
Yes, North Star MLS is
will
going to
it-
be one of the beta sites for this.
But will it, I guess what I'm saying, will I still be listing on the regular MLS, or is MLS going to cease to exist, or is it still going to go to two places?
Well, that's the decision for your broker, I guess, Ryan, in this case, that if this actually becomes reality, because it's 15 months behind schedule, the premise is the first point of entry is not the MLS. The first point of entry is Project Upstream, and then you decide as a broker if it's going to MLS or it's going someplace else.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
we talked a little bit about this tax bill, and part of it, at least that I've heard, is that some of the motivation behind trying to get this bill through is to help prop up the commercial real estate market. I think people are getting pretty concerned about the commercial mortgage-backed security default rate right now. I know you. SPAR, 90% residential, as you said. How much do you guys look into those type of issues and think about them and kind of weigh in? What are your thoughts there?
Well, the National Association has, again, 1.3 million members. They estimate that 10 to 15% nationally of that 1.3 million are commercial practitioners to some extent.
Right.
A lot of them are kind of dual, commercial, residential. The CCIM designees obviously are full-time professional commercial folks. So NAR does have a separate lobbying branch and separate economics and statistics division in Washington for the commercial area. So they do cover both sides.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about you personally? Are you focused on that at all, or what do you think about our specific market? Because what I'm seeing pretty consistently is, trends that I think make a lot of sense when you consider what we're doing with technology, where we're having, some difficulty with like retail absorption compared to some of the larger multifamilies.
Yeah. Well, I'm not all that much expert in commercial stats locally. I can tell you on the residential side that the problem is not enough inventory.
Right.
And the statistics for November of this year were that the inventory was about 1.9 months. So for your listeners, a balanced market is 6 months inventory of residential housing. So in other words, a balanced market is one where you've got enough houses currently listed that it would take 6 months to sell with average demand. So we've got 1.9 months. right now.
I was looking. I thought maybe it was for multifamily, but I thought we were even low, like 1.6 or something crazy.
Yeah,
but when I was looking at it though, I was also considering, hey, it's winter. Because the statistics are generated by some averaging of buying habits. Mm-hmm. So I have to imagine that means that there's some lag time for that to translate. So if say we're going into winter, for example,
right.
and people were buying like crazy in the summer, is that still affecting us in terms of, overrepresenting what the current demand is in the market? And
typically,
how is that put together?
Yeah, typically the stats that are put together are what they call seasonally adjusted.
Oh.
So that the market demand in the spring and summer selling season is taken into account versus the slower demand in the wintertime.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is a more accurate representation of...
Yes.
Interesting.
And so whenever you look at these reports, always look to see if it says seasonally adjusted.
That's a good tip.
That is a really good tip.
Yeah. Because if it's not seasonally adjusted, it's what you're saying. It's wildly erratic, and it's not really reflective.
Right. The disparity of the seasonal adjustment in and of itself would create an increase in the...
Yeah.
Very good, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
but the affordability is really good. The good story is that the State Association of Realtors here has an affordability index, and 100 is the sweet spot score. At the score of 100 on their scale, that means that the family with the average income in the metro can afford to buy the average priced home. So salary and price are in sync. So in 10 years ago, in 07, the affordability index was 85, which isn't bad, but it's still under 100. In November, it was 185.
Oh, wow.
So affordability is really good right now.
That's fantastic. And I mean,
that's great news for everybody.
Jobs. Yeah. We were talking with... I still think about this all the time, but we were talking with Ravi Norman. It must have been 8 months ago from Thor Construction, and he was alluding to their company right now is focused on moving into underserved areas to get the workforce there mobilized to be ready because of the projected worker shortage in the Twin Cities. And I think he said by 2021, 75,000 people that they were.
Yeah, I can't recall.
The exact statistic isn't irrelevant, but it is very important and cool when you're thinking about the affordability index to think about, hey, there's still all this track out in front of us of a demand for jobs, that we're going to be creating by continuing to grow our infrastructure and these large companies that we are attracting.
This last week, the Builders Association of the Twin Cities, BATSI, announced a new program where they're providing scholarships and mentorships to get high school students and graduates to start thinking about construction trade careers.
Oh, that's
because
great.
There's a huge shortfall.
Yeah, and that's something that we can attest to. And when I look at the statistics for that, I'm looking at multifamily in particular because we have a lot of younger people right now. Anecdotally, are looking to move into duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes because they can still get an FHA loan on it.
Right.
They can use those other units to qualify for their mortgage and get to look at it as a way of getting their foot in the door in real estate investing.
Right.
Granted, that may just be the circle that I run in. So I'm self-selecting perhaps. But what's so fascinating about it is what we looked at even a year ago in terms of cash flow minimums that you'd require to make a property a fruitful acquisition. All of the properties on the market right now are well beyond that threshold, and it's interesting because I think a lot of people look at it and they think that, hey, this is a problem. We're not gonna, this growth isn't sustainable, and I definitely do think that there is an adjustment coming. But when I'm looking at that market in particular, the replacement cost is still so much higher than the sale price, and I think we've all seen it if you've looked at multifamily at all. There's not a lot of new construction duplexes.
No.
So,
one of the other impacts of the tax bill, since you're talking about price adjustments, is the National Association retained PWC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, sorry. PWC, yeah. That big accounting firm. They retained them to do an analysis of the impacts of the tax legislation as proposed on the housing market. And their report back, which is consistent with independent, if you will, economists and analysts, financial guys, is that over the next couple of years, the average price of single-family homes could decrease 10 to 15% because of the tax bill. Because residential housing is not nearly as desirable an investment as it used to be.
Right. Yeah.
It's 100%.
Yeah.
And it's also an interesting factor, and going back to construction costs, but it's also land values, right? Like I think I've seen some overlaid graphs of 2003 through 2007 of the value of new builds and the value of or the cost of labor, and the cost of labor increased, but definitely not in proportion with the cost of the new build. So you can logically then go back and attribute it to the land, which is something that I think we're feeling right now too, where it's difficult. And affordable, of course, being a relative term, because if you're, again, in Palo Alto, $300,000 as a starting home would probably be a great deal, and something you
don't get $300,000 in Palo Alto. No.
But
that's a doghouse,
right? But regardless, in our market right now, it's a concern, because I think people. The typical number that I see people, first job out of college, they're usually being qualified somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000, and it's hard to find housing stock in a somewhat prestigious area that they may be desiring in that price range. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how all of this develops.
We'll have to wait and see. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Are there any historical trends maybe before we sign out here that you've noticed? Because I think a lot of investors right now are starting to hedge a little bit. They're slowing down a little bit on their investing. Spoke with this private equity gentleman that I met, and he sold 8,000 units in the last 6 months, just trying to move out of investment real estate in general. And then you see a lot of the other real estate brokerage owners that I speak to, they tend to think that it's going to continue to go up. Do you have any insight into it, and maybe not an endorsement one way or the other, but just some thoughts and some considerations we should be making?
Sure. The economists whose opinions I tend to respect and take to heart say that there is not another bubble that is developing right now.
Okay.
That the market is sustainable because interest rates are still low. All those crazy, if you can fog a mirror, you can get a mortgage kind of scenarios of the past are gone. And the fact that the economy is still growing at a moderately good pace, as the Fed raised interest last week because of their confidence in the economy staying strong and getting stronger. So all of those things, I think, tell us that the housing market for at least the next 2 to 3 years is going to be pretty stable.
Great news. What a way to end the podcast.
Yeah, don't worry, everyone. There's some hope out there. So, John, thanks so much for coming. Really appreciate it.
You're most welcome.
Really insightful. I got a lot out of it.
Yes,
and just
me too.
Perspective and things that I never think about. So, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you guys next time.